turn around. Hey, welcome back to my channel. I am back with another Tunisian crochet tutorial. This time we are going to make a cardigan. Just like my other Tunisian sweater tutorials, this one is super duper customizable, so you can make it to your exact body type. So if you're like me and you kind of have weird body proportions, this cardigan is really easy to customize and make as long or as short as you want, or as wide or as narrow as you want. And it's also super beginner friendly. If you know how to do a chain stitch, a single crochet, and a Tunisian double crochet, you're ready to make this cardigan.
Now, for those of you who are more advanced crocheters, you don't have to use a Tunisian double crochet. You can use almost any stitch you want. If you're looking to make a nice whimsical cardigan, I highly recommend using my Tunisian toadstool stitch. But for those of you who are beginners, stick with me and use a Tunisian double crochet.
Let's go over our materials. To make this cardigan, you are going to need a couple skeins of yarn. You're definitely going to need more than one, but the amount you need is going to depend on how big your cardigan is. So the smaller your cardigan is, the less you're going to need. The bigger it is, the more you're going to need. We'll figure out how to calculate exactly how much you need after this. This is a medium number 4 worsted weight yarn. And then you're going to need 2 different crochet hooks. So this is a Tunisian crochet tutorial, so you are going to need a Tunisian crochet hook. A Tunisian crochet hook is one that has this tail at the end of it. So this hook that we are using, this Tunisian crochet hook that we are using, is the same size that my yarn recommends. So my yarn recommends a 5mm crochet hook, and this is a 5mm Tunisian crochet hook. The next hook you're going to need is one that is slightly smaller than your yarn recommends. This is a 3.5mm crochet hook, and my yarn recommends a 5mm crochet hook. So this is slightly smaller than what the yarn recommends, and we're going to use this to make the ribbing for the cardigan. You're also going to need a measuring tape so that we can take our measurements to size our cardigan. Woo. And a tapestry needle so that we can weave in all of our yarn tails. This cardigan doesn't really require much sewing, but you are going to want something that you can use to hide all your yarn tails once you're done. And that is everything you need to make this cardigan. Now, before we jump into the actual tutorial, I want to take a moment to explain how this pattern works while we sit by this very realistic fireplace. Rather than using sizes like small, medium, and large, this cardigan is made to fit your exact body type or the body of whoever it is you're making it for. And in order to do that, we need to take a couple of measurements. So you're going to need to get a measuring tape and a notebook or some piece of paper, something so that you can write it down. That's really important, write it down. So the first measurement you need to take is from the top of your shoulder all the way down to wherever your cardigan is going to end. So if you want it to end where a traditional cardigan would end, you would measure from the top of your shoulder down to just above your hip. If you're like me and you've got kind of weird body proportions, this is pretty helpful because my waist is really, really short. And so a regular cardigan that I buy from the store usually is a little bit too long on me. So I'm going to measure all the way from the top of my shoulder all the way down to just above my hip. And that's where my cardigan is going to end. If you would like to make a really long cardigan, let's say you want to make one that's like all the way down to like your knees or whatever, you can do that. Just make sure that you take it from the top of your shoulder all the way down to wherever it is you want it to end. Then you want to take a measurement from the top of your shoulder all the way down to about level with your nipple, or if gravity has already gotten to you, where it would have been prior to that. Next, we're going to take a measurement from the base of our neck all the way down to our wrist. This is going to help us calculate the sleeve length. And the last measurement you need to take is all the way around your widest area that this sweater is going to cover.
So depending on your body proportions and how long you're making your sweater, your widest area could be your hips or it could be your chest. This is especially important if you've got what I like to call
church bosoms. You know, the kind that like suffocate little kids when you go and you give them your church hugs, like the kind of hugs. The most important thing is that we take a measurement of the widest area this cardigan needs to cover so that we can make sure it closes. If you are making this for someone else or you just don't want to take your own measurements directly, I'll leave a link down to the Craft Yarn Council's website where they have a list of standard measurements and sizes that you can use as a reference when you're making your cardigan. And the rest of the sizing we are going to work out with math. As with every tutorial I've done in the past, the second I mention that we're going to do some math, I can already hear some of you typing away in the comments like, I don't want to do math. But as I've said before, if you fit the average demographic for this channel, that means you're an adult. And this is elementary school level math. Get your shit together. All right, let's calculate out how big this all needs to be. The first thing we need to do is make a gauge. So a gauge is just a 10 by 10 swatch. So 10 stitches wide, 10 rows high, and we can use that to calculate how many stitches we're going to need to make a sweater that's going to fit whoever it is that we're making it for. So the first thing we need to do is make our foundation row, and we are going to chain 10. So we've got 10 chains. Now, for this cardigan, I am doing a Tunisian double crochet. So I'm also going to do 1 extra chain. So it's actually going to be 11 chains, and this is going to count as my first Tunisian double crochet. So to do a Tunisian double crochet, you're going to yarn over, put your hook through the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and that's a Tunisian double crochet. To do the next stitch, we are going to yarn over, then go into the next chain from the hook, yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2 loops, just like that. Then we're going to yarn over into the next chain, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. So 10 loops on our hook. Then we're going to do our return pass. So we're going to yarn over, pull through 1 loop, then yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and yarn over and pull through 2 until we get to the end of our row. And that is our first row of Tunisian double crochet. So to make our next row, that's 1 row, we're going to make our next row. We need to make 10 rows total. To start off a row of Tunisian double crochet, you chain 1, and that is your first stitch right there. Then from here on out, we're going to yarn over, then insert our hook into this stitch and go behind, and then pull up our loop. So as you can see, we split this stitch like that. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2. Into the next stitch, we are going to yarn over, put our hook through the stitch and come out behind, yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2. We're going to yarn over into the next stitch, pull through 2, and carry on like this until the end of the row. All right, so I'm at the end of my row, then I'm going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop to start, and then yarn over and pull through 2 until I get to the end of the row. And that's our second row. So now you need to repeat this until you have 10 rows in your gauge. And I will meet you back here when that's all done. Okay, so I've come to the end of my 10th row. So I'm just going to chain 1 to finish that gauge off. You don't need to bind it off or anything like that. This is just so that we can measure it and figure out how many stitches wide and how many rows tall we need to make it so that the cardigan will fit us. So the next thing we need to do is measure it, and make sure you write down your measurements. So 10 stitches wide makes a fabric that is, for me, about 7 centimeters wide. I like to use centimeters to calculate all this out instead of inches, just because it's a smaller unit, so I can either round up or down without it really affecting the size too much. If you round from, between 6 and 7 centimeters, it's not as big of a difference as if you were to round between, 1 and 2 inches, right? So that's why I like to use centimeters. You don't have to use centimeters. You can use inches. That's perfectly fine. But note that I am using centimeters. Centimeters are smaller than inches. Note that. Anyway, so 7 centimeters wide. Write it down. Now we're going to measure the length. And I think my is too short. There we go. So then you measure from the top all the way down to the bottom. And for me, that is 16 centimeters. Or for those of you using inches who didn't listen to my entire rant from before, that is 6 1/4 inch. 6.25 inches or 16 centimeters about. So I'm going to go with 16 centimeters. Yeah, as long as it's about right, you're good. It's not that serious. So there we go. Now we're going to learn how to calculate the rest of it using movie magic.
This cardigan is made with a back panel, 2 front panels, and 2 sleeves. Let's calculate the stitches and the rows for the back panel first. To do this, you need to divide your widest area by 2, then divide all of that by your gauge width, then multiply that by 10. For those of you who are like, wait, you're going too fast, fear not. I will write all of these down in the written pattern. You can find the link to the written pattern in both the description and the pinned comment. I left it in 2 different places. Let's use my measurements as an example. My widest area was 94 centimeters, so I need to divide that by 2 because half of that widest area is going in the front and half of it's going in the back. 94 divided by 2 is 47. 47 divided by 7 is 6.7. 6.7 times 10 is 67. So I need to have 67 stitches in my rows. Now that we know how many stitches wide it needs to be, let's calculate how many rows tall it's going to be. So to do that, we need to divide our cardigan length, which is the measurement we took from the top of our shoulder down to however long our cardigan is going to be, divided by our gauge length times 10. And that will give us our row count. So using my numbers as an example, my cardigan length is 40 centimeters. My gauge length is 16 centimeters. 40 divided by 16 is 2.5. Times 10 is 25. That means I'll have 25 rows in my back panel. So now I know the exact stitch count and row count for my back panel. It is 67 stitches wide and 25 rows tall. Now let's figure out the proportions for the front panels. We already know that it's going to be 25 rows tall because the back panel and the front panel need to be the same height. But now we need to figure out the stitches. To calculate the front panels, you need to take the stitch count from your back panel and subtract 10 stitches. That way we have a gap in the middle for where our neck and the ribbing that we're going to put on the front is going to go. Then we need to divide all of that by 2 so that you have 2 panels, one for the left and one for the right. So using my numbers as an example, 67 stitches minus 10 is 57 stitches. Divided by 2 is 28.5 stitches. But you can't have half a stitch, so I like to round down to the nearest stitch. In my case, it's going to be 28 stitches. So each of the front panels are going to be 28 stitches wide and 25 rows tall. Also, let me know in the comments if you want me to do another video that's a little bit more in-depth explanation of how gauges and calculating row counts and stuff are used. If that's something you want, let me know and I will make a video for it. Now that we have the front and back panel all worked out, we are going to start crocheting them finally. The sleeves we're going to calculate later.
Well, hey, I'm back. Hi, it's me, Editing Courtney. I forgot I needed to tell you some important things, which is why I am in my natural state. Number 1, I got my yarn at Ye Olde Lobby of Hobbies. Number 2, I used 5 skeins of that yarn. So if you happen to be the exact same size as me, which is pretty unusual because I have weird proportions, you'll probably need 5 skeins of that. Right now is about the point where a lot of you are going to check out of the video and go get the supplies to do this and then come back and make the cardigan. Before you do that, I need you to do something for me. Now, as I have established on videos on my other channel, I'm not cut out for OnlyFans. This is the best I can do. So before you check out of the video, if you could do me a big old favor and like this video and leave a comment for engagement, because if you don't, then the algorithm's just going to assume that this video is no good, and it's just going to stop pushing it to people who might want to learn how to do a Tunisian crochet cardigan. And if you feel like sticking around, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. We'd love to have you here. Anyway, back to the tutorial. This cardigan starts off with ribbing and then goes into Tunisian crochet. So I've already made most of the pieces. Each piece is pretty much just a rectangle. So they're all exactly the same procedure to make. You just make them in varying widths and heights. I'm going to show you a small swatch, and then you can make all your pieces to your exact specifications that we just calculated. Like I've said in previous tutorials, I'm sure none of you are idiots. You can figure it out. And if you can't, then this probably isn't the tutorial for you. That's okay. Not everything on the internet is going to be for you. So first things first, we need to make the ribbing. So to do a basic ribbing, we need to make our slip knot. And we're going to be using our standard crochet hook, that one that is slightly smaller than our yarn recommends. I'm going to chain 16. The number of chains you have is going to correspond with how thick your ribbing is. So if you don't like a fat ribbing, then you can do fewer chains. If you like an extra beefy ribbing, you can do more chains. So for me, I'm going to chain 16. 1, 2, 3. So that's 16. Now we're going to go and do 1 single crochet in every chain across. So for me, that should end with 15 single crochets. So we're going to go into the next chain from the hook and just single crochet 1 in every chain all the way across. Okay, so I've come to the end of my row, and then I'm going to chain 1 and turn. From here on out, in order to make the ribbing, you are going to do back loop single crochets only. So for every single row, you're only going to do crochets in the back loop. And go through the back loop only. So we're going to single crochet 1 in every stitch all the way across, only in the back loop. That's what's going to create the ribbed effect. Back loop single crochets. Okay, so I've come to the end of my row, and as you can see, the back loop single crochet kind of creates this little ridge right here, and that's what we're after. So we're going to chain 1 and turn. So we've got 2 rows of our ribbing so far. And you need to do 1 row for every stitch wide.
So in my case, I calculated 67 stitches wide, and that means I am going to make 67 rows of ribbing, 1 for each stitch. So for my back panel, it's 67 stitches wide, and for my front panels, it's 28 stitches wide. So 67 rows of ribbing for my back panel and 28 rows of ribbing for my front panels.
Okay, so I've come to the end of my rows, and as you can see, this is pretty stretchy. You might be like, oh, I needed this to be 15 inches long, and it's not. But if you stretch it a little bit, it'll get to as wide as you need it. And over time, this starts to relax a lot too, but yeah, it's very, very stretchy. So as long as you have the right number of rows, you're good. Each one of these ridges represents 2 rows, basically. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 rows. Now we are going to chain 1 to finish off this row, just like you normally would. But rather than turn and go back the other way, we are actually going to turn it on its side and go across the top. So across the top, we are going to do 1 single crochet across the top of every row. So for me, I've got 20 rows, which means I'm going to do 20 single crochets. So let me zoom in. So there's going to be 1 really obvious place and 1 not so obvious place. So here's the not so obvious place followed by the obvious place. So you can kind of see where there's natural kind of gaps in the rows. So you're going to have 1 in that gap and then 1 in the right there. It doesn't have to be perfect or anything, so don't stress about it, as long as you just get the right number of single crochets going across the top. And if you come out at the end and you're like, oh no, I needed 20, but I only have 19, just do an increase. It's fine, no biggie. no biggie. So I'm going to go into this first one and single crochet. Now make sure that your single crochets are not too tight, because if they're too tight, you're going to have trouble getting your Tunisian hook in there. After this row, we're going to change to our Tunisian crochet hook, and we need that to be able to fit in these stitches. And our Tunisian crochet hook is a little bit fatter than this hook that we're using for the ribbing. So make sure that you leave your stitches a little bit loose so that you can get a bigger hook in there. So now we're going to change to our Tunisian crochet hook, but before we do that, we're actually going to chain one. And that's going to count as our first stitch for the Tunisian crochet row. So we're going to take out this hook. We're going to, just like this, and we're going to flip our work over to this side. Grab our Tunisian crochet hook. Put that in. And bam, we're ready to go. So this chain one and loop on our hook counts as our first stitch for our double crochet rows. So from here on out, we're just going to do back and forth Tunisian double crochet. So this is our first stitch. And then to carry on into the next one, we're going to yarn over and go through into this single crochet and pull through, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops, just like you do, you know, as normal with Tunisian crochet. We're going to go through and do 1 Tunisian double crochet in every stitch across. Okay, so I've done a few rows of double crochets, and this is probably sufficient to give you an idea of what it looks like. So you're just going to carry on doing all of the rows of double crochets that you calculated earlier. If you calculated, 20 rows to make it the length that you need it, go through and do your 20 rows of Tunisian double crochet.
Once you get to the end of your rows, you're going to bind it off by doing 1 single crochet in every Tunisian double crochet across the row. I am reusing footage because I forgot to film this bit. So this is footage from a different tutorial, but the concept remains the same. Go through the stitch as you normally would, but instead of doing a Tunisian double crochet, just do a regular old single crochet, 1 in every stitch across the top to bind it off. Then go through and repeat these steps so that you have a back panel and 2 front panels. Now if you're making this using Tunisian double crochet like I did, you may notice that your stitches and your rows are starting to look a little crooked. That's totally normal. That's just the nature of Tunisian double crochet. It's not a big deal because once we attach everything together, that's going to kind of straighten out and it's not going to be noticeable or anything like that. So if it's starting to look a little diagonal, don't really worry about it. It's fine. Unless it's starting to look super duper diagonal, in which case you might have missed a stitch or something somewhere.
Okay, let's make the sleeves. And the sleeves start the exact same as the rest of it. We're going to start with ribbing, but I like to make the ribbing for my sleeves slightly narrower than the ribbing that I do for the bottom. So the ribbing that I did for the bottom was 15 stitches wide, and the ribbing that I'm going to do for the cuff portion of the wrist is only going to be 10 stitches wide. So it's up to you how wide you want your ribbing to be at the cuffs. For me, I'm going to do it 10 stitches. And we are going to make ribbing that is long enough to fit around our wrist. You don't want to stretch it to go around your wrist. You just want it to be around your wrist. So I'm going to make a length that is long enough to fit around my wrist. If you are making this for someone else, you can use some of the resources that I talked about earlier. You can go on the website that has kind of standard clothing sizes. You can do whatever measurements you need to take. And you can make a length of ribbing that goes to a certain measurement. For me, I'm making it for myself, so I'm just going to do it until it fits around my wrist. But it's up to you. So once you have ribbing that's long enough to fit around your wrist comfortably, like you shouldn't have to stretch it to fit around your wrist, it should just fit comfortably. We're going to do just like we did before, and we're going to do 1 single crochet across the top of the ribbing. So once you have all your single crochets across the top of the ribbing, you're going to count the number of stitches you have, because the number of stitches you have is going to be your starting place for calculating our increase pattern for the sleeve, because the sleeve is going to gradually get wider and wider and wider as we go. So we're going to need to do a couple increases. But in order to figure out when and where we need to increase, we need to be able to calculate it. So count the number of stitches that you have across the top, and that is going to be your starting point for calculating how many increases you need to do and how frequently you need to do them.
Let's calculate the sleeve length. The first thing we need to do is measure the width of just one of our front panels, not both of them, just one of them, because they are presumably both the same width. Then subtract that from your neck to wrist measurement so that we know where the arm starts and how long it needs to be. So for example, my neck to wrist measurement was 56 centimeters and my front panel width was 20 centimeters. So my sleeve needs to be 36 centimeters long. And just like we did before, we're going to use the exact same formula to calculate rows. So we're going to divide the sleeve length by the gauge length and multiply that by 10 to get our row count. So in my case, 36 centimeters divided by 16 centimeters is 2.25 times 10 is 22.5 rows. But you can't have half a row, so I'm going to round that up to 23. So I know I need 23 rows. Next, let's figure out how many stitches wide. So we're going to multiply our shoulder to underarm measurement by 2 so that we have a better idea of the circumference of the arm instead of just on one side. Then we're going to divide that by our gauge width, then multiply that by 10. In my case, 22 centimeters times 2 is 44 centimeters, divided by 7 is 6.3, times 10 is 63 stitches. So now I know that the top of my sleeve, where it meets the shoulder, needs to be 63 stitches wide. Now go back and count the stitches on that ribbing you just made. That's the cuff of the sleeve. The difference between the shoulder stitch count and the cuff stitch count is going to give us how many increases we need to do in order to widen out the sleeve. So in my case, 63 minus 38 equals 25 increases. But since I like to do 2 increases per row, I'm going to round that down to 24. So my final stitch count is going to be 62 stitches instead of 63 stitches. You can round up or down based on your own preferences. The increase pattern for this is 2 increases per increase row. So in my case, my 24 increases equal 12 increase rows. The increase pattern will be the total number of rows divided by our number of increase rows, and that will let us know how frequently we need to increase. So in my case, 23 divided by 12 is 1.9, but you can't have a partial row, so I'm going to round that up to 2. So it's 1 non-increase row and 1 increase row. When you round up or down, that's going to change the number of rows you ultimately have. So in my case, I originally calculated 23 rows, but in order to make my increase pattern fit nicely, I'm going to have to do 24 rows. Adding or subtracting a row here and there is fine, and it won't significantly impact the final size of the sleeve. It'll just be slightly longer or shorter than you had originally intended, or slightly narrower or wider than you originally intended. It's so slight you won't even notice it. And at the end of the day, this is crochet, not woodworking, so we don't have to be super precise. Close enough is close enough. So this is what my increase pattern looks like. Every other row is an increase row. And don't worry, in a minute I will show you exactly how we're going to do the increases, but mine is every other row. Yours might be different. Some of you may have fewer increase rows, in which case your increase pattern will look like this, where you've got, 2 or 3 rows that don't have increases followed by an increase row. It all depends on how wide your shoulders are, how narrow your wrists are, a lot of things like that. So everybody's increase pattern is going to look slightly different.
Now that we've figured out how frequently we need to increase, we can go ahead and change to our Tunisian crochet hook. And just like we did before, we are going to do rows of Tunisian double crochets. So my increase pattern is 2 increases per row every other row. So this first row for me is just going to be 1 in every stitch across, and then my second row is going to be where I do increases. So I'm going to do my first row, and then I will come back here and show you how I'm doing my increases. Okay, now I am ready to do my first row of increases. So I'm going to do 2 increases per row every other row. So whenever I'm doing 2 increases per row, what I like to do is have this second stitch from the beginning and the second stitch from the end be where I do my increases. But if you have more increases per round or anything like that, you can choose where you want your increases to be. Just make sure that they're evenly spaced out. So to do an increase for Tunisian double crochet, I love doing increases for Tunisian double crochet because they are very similar to just regular old crochet increases. You don't have to like put an extra loop over your hook or anything like that. So the way you do it is we're going to go in and we're going to do our first double crochet. So here's the first one. And then to increase, we're going to yarn over and go back into that same stitch as before. Back into the same stitch, pull through, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So we just did 2 double crochets in this one stitch, and that's our increase. And then from here on out, you can just go and do the rest of your row. Okay, so I've come to the second to last stitch in my row, and now I'm going to do another increase. So I'm going to do 1 double crochet in this stitch, and then I'm going to yarn over and do a second double crochet in the same stitch. Just like that. So I've got 2 double crochets in the one stitch, and for this entire row, I am now 2 stitches wider than I was before. So now I'm going to finish off my row and do my return pass. Okay, so now I'm at the end of my row. And that is how you do your increases for the sleeves. So depending on the pattern that you calculated and how long it needs to be, just go ahead and do your increase pattern for the length that you calculated until you are at the end of your sleeve. And then I will show you what to do next. Okay, so when you come to the end of your last round, make sure you do your 1 row of single crochets all the way across to bind it off. Now, one thing that you might notice is that it looks like it's going a little bit diagonal. That's okay. That's not a big problem or anything like that. Just due to the nature of Tunisian double crochet, is it kind of just whoop, goes off to the side. Don't worry about that. That's fine. So once you have bound off your edges, we are going to fold it in half. For this next bit, you can still use your Tunisian crochet hook, but I don't like the sound of it flopping back and forth if I don't have to have it that way. So I'm just going to grab a different hook of a similar size. Now we are going to bind off, we're going to sew the sides together. So the way we do that is we just do, you can either do slip stitches or single crochets down the side. I'm going to do single crochets just because I want to, but you can also do slip stitches. And looking at your side here, it is a little bit like weird to crochet into the side, but looking at your double crochets, you're going to notice there's kind of 2 parts to the double crochet. There's this top part right here and then the bottom part. Okay, so each double crochet is going to get 2 single crochets or 2 slip stitches, 1 in the top portion and 1 in the bottom portion. So there's like 2 levels to your double crochet here and here. So each one of these is just going to get like 2. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can also sew this together if you want. If you just want to take a tapestry needle and sew it together, that's perfectly fine as well. You don't have to crochet it together. You can just sew it together. So pretty much what we're doing is we're attaching these together. And so whatever way you got to do to make that happen, just attach them together. So this is the seam. So we are going to seam these together. So the way that I'm going to do it is just by single crocheting everything together. You can also slip stitch everything together. You can sew it together. Just do what you got to do. So I'm going to start that off. And this is the method that we're going to use to seam everything together. So we're going to assemble all of the parts of this cardigan together using the same technique. And then once you come to the end of your seam, you can just finish off and then cut your yarn. And then we will weave in these tails a little later. So as you can see, this is what it looks like. Looking good. So you need to make 2 sleeves. We are ready to seam this all together, and then we will work on the ribbing for the front. So here is my back piece right here. You want to do this with ugly sides facing out. If you're like me and you're like, I can't, they both look fine, then you can seam it just as is. So if you're like me and you're like, these kind of look the same from both sides, then you don't need to worry about which sides are together. It's just one side is going to become the inside and the other side is going to become the outside, and we are going to seam it with the inside out. So if you feel you have a pretty side and an ugly side, you can seam it with the pretty sides together and the ugly sides facing out. So we're going to start with the shoulders, which are these ones right here. So we'll do this one side at a time. And we are going to seam that just like we did with the sleeves. So just doing single crochets or slip stitches or sewing it together, you know, whatever you got to do. We're just seaming it all the way across here. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. What you're going to do is you're going to go through one side of the fabric, then through the other side. Pull your yarn through and single crochet together, just like that. So go through both sides of the fabric, pull through, and single crochet them together. All right, and once you've reached the end of your seam, you can just finish that off. And I will show you how to weave these in once we're done seaming this all together. And now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now it looks like this. Ta-da! Okay, next we are going to do the sides. I'm going to line up my sleeves, and then I'm going to take a little bit of just scrap yarn and just kind of mark off the bottom of the, like the armpit portion of the sleeve is, just so that I know. And then if you want, you know, once you've marked off the armpits, you can put it on, you know, just to make sure that the armpits are where you want them to be. They're not going to be too low or anything like that before you seam it. This looks good. So I tried that on, and I'm very happy with where the armpit portion is going to be. So I can go ahead and seam the sides. And then just due to the nature of the stitch that I used, sometimes it feels like it doesn't quite line up. Just, you know, make sure that you keep an eye on it, and it should line up in the end. As long as it's about right, you're good. Like, it's not that serious. Like, if it's like, oh no, it's not perfectly lined up, relax. It's not that serious. Like, as long as it's about right, you're good. Okay, so now that we've reached the armpit area, you can remove your stitch marker, and then we're going to take the sleeve, and we are going to turn it so that the seam side is facing in. So you want the right side out, basically. So there you go. That's the seam side facing in. Then we are going to line it up with the hole for the armpit. So you're going to take the portion of your sleeve with the armpit side. So here's the wrist side, here's the shoulder armpit side, with the seam facing the armpit. So you want this seam on the side to line up with this seam on here. And we're going to stick it inside the armhole. And, oh, let me just, ooh, there we go. And we're going to line it up. And you're going to make sure that you line up the seam for the armpit with the seam from the side, so that they're on top of each other. And then you can use stitch markers or something to attach these together. Normally, like for individual seams, I don't really do that, but for the arms, I am going to use something to hold them together so that everything stays lined up. You're going to count up till you're exactly at the top of the shoulder, and then line that up with the shoulder seam. Whoopsies. Line that up with the shoulder seam, just like that. So now we've got everything lined up. And just like we did before, we can go through and, either single crochet them together, slip stitch them together, sew them together, however you are attaching everything, just go through and attach the sleeves. All right, and then once you get to your very last stitch, you can go ahead and then slip stitch to finish that off, and then cut your yarn. Ta-da! And then if you pull out the sleeve like this, ba-bam! Your sleeve is attached. Your sleeve is attached, everything is even, it looks good. Now you can do the same thing on the other side. So exact same procedure for the other sleeve. Okay, once you have everything sewn together, we are going to weave in these yarn tails before we work on the final portions. So the way we do that is you take your tapestry needle and you thread it with your yarn tail, just like that. Then you're going to kind of weave it through your stitches. You want to break the yarn apart a little bit because that's going to secure this in place a little better. So you're going to go one way, pull it on through, and make sure that you're not accidentally sewing more of this together. So you pull it through. Then you're going to go back the way you came and make sure that you're breaking those plies of yarn apart. And then you're going to go back the other way one more time. So you pretty much go this way, this way. If you do it 3 times, it won't come out, or it's going to be really difficult for it to come out. So that's why we're going back and forth and back and forth. Ow. There we go. And so from the other side, you can't really tell what happened. And then once you've got that weaved in, you can cut your yarn. So go ahead and weave in all of your yarn tails, and then we will do the final ribbing for the front. Okay, so now that we have everything sewn together, we're going to work on closing up the front. So we're going to make a really long bit of ribbing to go around this.
The procedure to make this ribbing is the same as all of the other ribbing on this. The ribbing that I made for mine is about 10 stitches wide, and you just make a really, really, really long portion of ribbing that's long enough to wrap around the entire opening in your cardigan.
Okay, once you come to the end of your ribbing, we can attach it to your sweater. So we're going to turn the sweater right side out, and then you can use your pins or stitch markers or whatever to attach it to the edge. Okay, so once you have that all kind of clipped together, for this one I actually do recommend that you sew it in place instead of trying to like slip stitch it or single crochet it on, simply because these don't, like the rows and the number of rows with your ribbing aren't going to line up perfectly. So in this case, I think it would be better to sew, just because, they're not going to line up neatly in a way that's going to allow you to slip stitch it on really well. So I'm just going to sew this in place using a whip stitch. And then once you have it all sewn on, you can weave in your yarn tails, and that's it. You'll be all done.
And here is our finished cardigan. Now, as I said earlier in this video, I'm not cut out for OnlyFans, so if you like this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!